Hi there. Hey, this is Brad with M&M Distribution, Asphalt, Sealcoating.com, and we're going to be covering the shaft seal replacement in our 5.5 horse and 6.5 horse industrial transfer pump. We use this pump on some of our seal coat spray systems, particularly the basic units. The ASD 275 is a pretty common one that this system goes on, but this pump is very common in this industry, and this video pretty much can be used regardless of what style of pump you have, as long as it's an aluminum housing trash pump. So we're going to be just going step by step through this, and I'll show you guys how to replace this seal. It's not a hard thing to do. Just make sure that it's easier if you remove the pump from the system if you can, and get it up on the bench where you can get work on it and prepare the pump for the seal. So we'll get started. First thing I'm going to do is go step by step through the tools and the supplies that you're going to need. Okay, the tools, for the most part, other than just maybe a screwdriver or something like that to scrape with, but you're going to need a new shaft seal. The part number on the shaft seal that I use is a 2120-0050, and you'll get both the ceramic and the carbon spring set all in one package. Okay, we sell those through our website through the replacement parts. I like to use Scotch Seal Industrial 800. You don't have to buy a tube this big. You can get a tube smaller than this at an auto parts store, but it's a good sealant that is pretty tolerant to oils after it sets up. 3/8 ratchet, 1/4 inch ratchet. You're going to need a number 10 metric socket on the end of that. You're going to need a 1/2 inch socket for your 3/8 drive. Other than that, you shouldn't need too much, okay? Other than maybe, like I said, maybe a screwdriver to scrape with, and maybe a wire brush. I also use an 1.5 inch piece of pipe to drive the new seal in. You can also use copper if you have copper. I've got both here, but just an 1.5 inch galvanized nipple, 4 or 5 inches long is plenty, and I'll show you where we're going to use that in just a little bit. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the housing from the pump, and then this here is the housing. You don't have to take the discharge off, and you don't have to take the suction off. The suction has a rubber flap in it, but you can leave it intact if you want to. But there are 4 bolts here, and this is where the number 10 metric is going to come in handy on all 4 corners of the housing. Okay, we're going to remove that. There's a rubber O-ring under here. You don't want to damage that, so we're going to be gentle about pulling this apart, making sure we don't tear that O-ring in two whenever we pull this assembly apart. Okay, we've got those 4 bolts out. This whole assembly here is going to come off, just like so. And you can see your O-ring there that I was talking about. This is your diffuser, and usually it'll come off. It's no big deal. It just sits in the housing there, okay? But you can take it off or just lay it to the side. We're going to be dealing with this part of the pump, though. This is the impeller. We're going to have to take it off next. But like I said, let's pull this O-ring out and make sure we protect that. And I didn't mention earlier, but you want some Vaseline or a little bit of grease to grease this as we go back with it. Okay, and if you've got any buildup in here where your O-ring is, you want to take that screwdriver and scrape that material out. Wire brush this and make this nice and clean for reassembly. But right now we're gonna pull this impeller off. Our impeller is a solid molded piece of cast iron, and it screws on the engine shaft. And the best way to get this impeller off is to either take a hammer with a wooden block and stick the block between an impeller blade and tap it counterclockwise, or I like to use a phenolic hammer. And you're just going to take and you're going to tap this thing until it screws off. Okay, and you're going to unscrew the impeller, like I said, counterclockwise until it's all the way off the shaft. Okay, and there on the inside of our impeller is our ceramic seal, which we're going to replace that in just a minute. So we're going to lay it off to the side. Here's our carbon seal here, and we're going to pull that out in a minute too, but the next step is going to be removing this housing. Okay, we're going to have 4 1/2-inch bolts that hold this pump housing to the engine. So we're going to want to take our 1/2-inch socket that I talked about earlier, and let's remove this housing away from the engine so we can get to that seal. Okay, I've got those bolts out, and now we're going to slide our pump housing away from the engine, and that exposes the back end of the motor. So we can sit this motor on the floor now and get this out of the way, and we're going to be working with the pump housing and the impeller to press our new seals in place before reassembly. Okay, I've turned the housing over on its front side here, flat on the bench, and got my impeller laid out here. The ceramic seal is pretty easy to get out. You're just going to take and pop that out and take the rubber out behind it. Okay, just roll it out of there. Make sure this area here is clean and clean of rust mostly. We're going to want to sand that a little bit, because I like to even put a little bit of that 3M Scotch seal inside here. The carbon part of our seal, we're going to take, and this is the back side of it right here. We're going to take this hammer and the screwdriver, and we're going to tap this out and until it falls out of the housing. And then you can tell I beat this one up pretty good to get it out, but you're going to have to push it out with the screwdriver and a hammer. And we're going to discard that. We're going to discard this old part of our seal. We're not going to use those anymore. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take some sand cloth, and we're going to clean these areas up real good where the new seals have to go back. And then we're going to use some of that Scotch seal to bond the new seal. And we'll have to drive the new carbon back in the housing here. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Okay, you can see I've polished the housing where the carbon is going to go with sand cloth, and really work that down. And this groove is what I really want you to focus on getting clean. You can do that with a screwdriver, but the carbon seal is going to be pressed all the way flush, and we're going to do that with that piece of 1.5-inch pipe that I talked about earlier. Okay, we're going to use that mallet and this piece of pipe. We're going to drive that down to where this flange on this carbon seal is flush with the top of this housing. Okay, but we're going to use that that industrial sealant in there first. So I'm going to put a thin coat in there, and then I'm going to put a thin coat on this seal housing. Then I'm going to press that in with that hammer. And over here on the ceramic side of the seal, I want you to use the same sealer, but don't touch this ceramic here with your fingers, because the oil in your finger can actually penetrate this ceramic surface, and it can create a leak. So as we go pressing that back down there, we're going to use a piece of plastic or something like that just to protect it from your grease on your hands. Okay, but we're also, like I said earlier, we're going to put a coat of that sealer on the rubber, and we're also going to put a coat of it inside the impeller housing. See how shiny that is? I've used a wire brush to clean that out, to clean all the rust out of there. So cleanliness is going to be extremely important whenever we go pressing these seals back in place. Okay, and now we're ready to press it. I've sealed both surfaces on both sides of the seal, so I just want you to see just a thin coat. Okay, is all we need, and this stuff dries within a few minutes, or at least it gets tacky. So you want to be ready to go with everything before you get to this point. Okay, now I'm going to pull this in tight, because I want you to see that this flange on this seal on the carbon is all the way flush, and that's extremely important. If it's not flush, it's cockeyed. If it's cockeyed, it's going to leak. So, and you'll have to end up replacing the seal again. So make sure, and like I said, I just took this piece of pipe, okay, 1.5-inch pipe and a hammer, and I just pressed it down until it was all the way flush in that housing. This is probably the most important part of the entire process of changing this seal, is making sure both sides of the seal go flat. Okay, I also took the phenolic hammer and I put a piece of plastic over the top of this, and I tapped this ceramic down until it was flush. You can hold this up, you can see just how flush that is. Okay, so it too has to be flush and straight in the impeller, otherwise it's not going to ride all the way around on the face of this carbon seal, and you will have a leak. Reassembly is pretty easy. If your pump plate has this little flange here in the back of it, this right here, you want to make sure that you put that on the bottom. Okay, so we're going to put this back on now, and the 4 10mm bolts are going to go, or the 4 1/2 inch bolts are going to go first, and then we'll put the impeller back on. And the next step is going to be putting your impeller on, and remember it's going to screw on clockwise. We took it off counterclockwise, and it really won't be necessary to screw it on that tight, but if you want to take your, if you do have a phenolic hammer like I had, and give that thing a 2 or 3 good taps, that would assure that it's not going to come off. But this pump rotates counterclockwise anyway, so it tightens the impeller as it goes, so it's not going to be a big issue. And the last and final step is going to be putting our housing and our diffuser back up on the pump plate. You notice I've already put our rubber gasket back in. I did use a little bit of grease, so I like to lubricate it just a little bit, and then make sure that it doesn't pinch whenever you put this housing back up on. But basically just put those 4 number 10 bolts back up in there like we took it apart, and that is the last step of your seal replacement. You do want to let the sealer dry that we put in the shaft seal, and I'd give that sealer, I'd give it at least 3 or 4 hours before I even begin to use the pump, and then you should be fine. Okay, we're completely back together, and this whole process probably should not take you more than an hour. And if you are a seal coater and you rely on this pump to run your seal coat systems, I would definitely, after you do this once, I would definitely have an extra seal on hand. Just because if you're on a weekend or something like that and you blow a seal out, you know, it's nice to know that you have a backup. And these seals do fail because, you know, a lot of guys will turn the valve, the 2-inch valve on the outlet down to increase their spray pressure, and in doing so it puts extra pressure on the seal, and eventually it will blow the seal out. Also, some guys mix a little bit of sand with their sealer. This pump will, you know, it's really not designed for too much abrasive, but it will take a little bit, but because it has a cast iron impeller in it. But it, again, if you put too much in it, it's going to blow the seal out, and it can even damage the back end of the pump. You know, if material gets between the impeller and the wear plate back here, this pump plate, it will wear a hole in that pump plate. These parts are all replaceable, but it's going to be you know, downtime for you when you're trying to be out there and seal. So have some extra parts on hand, and just, you know, the best thing is to have some extra parts and know how to change these parts.